Now I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. We are joined by Jody Beloit of Roxbury Farm CSA and Elizabeth Henderson of the Agricultural Justice Project. I'll turn it over to you, Jody.
All right, I'm going to share my screen really quick. All right, so I'm really grateful that Liz asked me to be part of this workshop today because, like all of you, I want to continue to improve how the workplace is on our farm and to continue to grow my skill set on how to be a good manager. So I'm from Roxbury Farm CSA. I'm one of the farmers there. I've been there since 1999 and I took on a management role in 2001. So I've made a lot of mistakes over the years. I've had the privilege to work with a lot of amazing people who have given so much to this farm. And so that's one of the reasons why I want to continue to improve my skill set as a way to also be thankful and grateful to all of the labor that people have contributed to this farm. This is a little bit of how it started, where it's going. I am lucky to manage the farm with my sister, Carrie Latchelet. She joined the farm in 2013, and in 2018, we became business co-owners of Roxbury Farm CSA. Every year, we have between 8 and 10 full-time employees. We're lucky that we have a core group of people that continue to come back every year. And by this long-term relationship that I've had with our employees, today I'm going to share some of the things that I've found that have improved the workplace. Liz is later going to share a lot about the Agricultural Justice Project, which can really help us to have clarity and some better policies about farm labor management. And I'm also really looking forward to the questions and learning from all of you about how you have improved management on the farm. A lot of it boils down for us to communication and being good communicators. And that's something that I continue to work on every year, is improving my communication skills. And with communication, we have a couple of different goals. One of them is to have clarity of what people can expect from us as employers and as what we expect from the people who work on the farm. We also want people to have all of the information and access to the information that will help them to be successful on the job and the tasks that they take on. And we've also found over the years that people feel the most engaged and happiest at work when they can take on responsibility and feel independent. So by having all of the information they need, they're better able to reach that goal of independence. We also want to we've learned to be mindful of how we communicate with people. We want to think about the language that the people are most comfortable communicating in and doing our best to communicate in those languages. We also want to be mindful and of how people are comfortable with reading and writing and communicating verbally if necessary. Also being mindful of people's access to technology. I know that communicating with text and email and stuff like Google Sheets and things like that is something that a lot of us really like to do, but also being mindful that a lot of people may not have access to the internet or to that technology. So also making things available by hard copies and printing things out for people to take home or have access to at the farm. So some of the communication tools that we've developed over the years, and especially our employment and housing agreements that we have with people, we took a lot of that from the Agricultural Justice Project materials. It was really helpful for us to write this. And it lays out what employees can expect from us as far as pay schedules, workers' compensation, days off, sick days, our conflict resolution policy, all of those things so that people know what to expect when they come to work the first day. And it also sort of outlines our work hours, our code of conduct, and those sorts of things so that people know what we expect from them. We also do a weekly task list that people on the farm can contribute to, and we put that together so every Monday morning people have an idea of what work is ahead of them that week. We feel that it really improves things when people don't just show up and are like, what are we doing? So they have an idea and they can like look at the list and be like, okay, this is a list. These are the things that I can take on. These are the things that other people are going to take on, and it just makes the work flow much better. We also have just a lot of materials to give people information like on all around the farm. So we want people to feel like they have the information at their fingertips to make sure that they're doing their job successfully. So things like cheat sheets on transplanters and seeding machines that do row spacing. To the first day of the season, we have the plan for the year laid out. So we know like we have our greenhouse seeding plan, our direct seeding plan, our transplanting plan, and our crop rotation laid out and printed out for people so that they have an overall view of what's going to be happening on the farm this season. To things like when we are in the harvest season, that we all of the harvest trucks have the harvest list, so that people know exactly what we're going to be doing that day. Again, just ways to share information in all different ways so that people have access to it. We've also found that setting aside specific times during the day and the season to check in with people so that people can share what it is they've been doing that day and hear from everyone else what they've been doing, and checking in with people just to make sure that everything is going well, and that if we have these times set aside, we make sure it happens, because as we all know, things get kind of crazy, and we just want to make sure that if we have we check in it when we start the day, we check in again after coffee break, and we check in again after lunch with everyone on the farm team. We also want to think about our work schedules. I mean, I think we all know that there's always a lot to be done, but especially we have a lot of employees on our farm that have families who have kids. So, and they've expressed to us the importance of having a flexible as possible work schedule. So we've made it a priority to make sure that people can come and go as they need to bring their kids to childcare, bring their kids to school and pick them up again, and letting them know that if their kids are sick, they have doctors or dentist appointments, that is the thing that is a priority for them to be able to do and to leave work. We've also want to think about weather. Like I know because we're all out there in all kinds of weather, and making accommodations for when it's really, really hot or really, really cold or really, really wet. Keeping people out of the heat in the middle of the day, or also things just like if it's raining and we're harvesting 350 bunches of radishes, we're all out there doing the radishes. Like no one gets to be dry and in the barn until we're all drying in the barn. And I think that this has really built a lot of crew morale and just, make us all feel like we're in this together, and that, we all want to take care of each other. Another thing that people have expressed that's really important is that they feel like they're continually growing in their skill set, either skills on the farm or management skills. People want to continually learn and grow so that they can feel really engaged and find meaning in their work. Another thing that we found really valuable is that we have an end of the year full farm team reflection on the season. And the way we've structured that is that we start with arugula and go through all of the crops to zucchini. And we're discussing what worked and what didn't. And what we're really looking for is to find like the weak links on the farm, where we're getting bogged down, where people are feeling really discouraged or stressed out, or places that we're just not getting the work done when we need to get it done. And then that has led us to be able to make decisions such as how we completely change a growing system, like moving our tomatoes into a covered space because we're tired of our tomato plants dying after all of the work of trellising because of the weather. or year after year, the farm team identifies that onions, everything about onions stresses them out and just causes a lot, just a lot of like stress and trouble. So we then decided to only grow fresh onions, and we've taken storage onions completely off of our growing plan, and we buy those in, and that's made a huge change in how August and July feel on the farm. Or we'll make equipment purchase decisions, things that make the work easier on our bodies or help us to get things done in time, so we're not out, harvesting carrots at the end of November in the snow. And I think by getting feedback from everybody on the farm, we're able to make better decisions, and then we all feel like we have a meaningful role to play in the success of the farm. Carrie and I have also found that it's important and helpful for us to continue to grow our skill set by being able to attend workshops like this or other workshops in areas that help us to be better managers, and also make it available to people who are working on the farm, to give them opportunities to go to different workshops and classes and develop skill sets and things like that. We don't really have time to go over on the farm, like business management skills or different like growing skills, things that they're interested in and really helps them feel like they're, again, growing their skill set. And lastly, another thing that we have found that's been really helpful in building trust and building strong interpersonal relationships on the farm is identifying issues that are really important to our farm team members outside of work, and then being advocates and supporters of that work. We have immigrant employees, and we also recognize that a huge amount of people doing agricultural labor in New York and across the United States are immigrants. So that by advocating for immigrant rights and for giving our time and volunteering to advocate for those rights is something that's been really important to our farm, and also I think has built stronger ties in our community overall. So it's not only helped build trust on our farm, but also trust and relationships in our community. So those are just a few things that I wanted to share with you. And now I think Liz is going to take over.
Thanks, Jody. That was really, really good. This workshop is going beyond legal to fair. And I think Roxbury Farm is an outstanding example of a farm that's made every effort to be fair to the people who work with you. So let's see some of the practices that are helpful to people. By the way, I am speaking to you from unceded Seneca land in Rochester, New York, and I really welcome this new custom of acknowledging that we are on stolen ground. We have so much to do to make amends, but it's good to be working on it, all of us together. So for a farm to be sustainable, the farm needs a steady, well-trained labor force, and the products of the farm must bring a price in the marketplace that covers the cost of production, plus a living wage for the farmer, money to do repairs and maintenance, to pay for continuing education for the farm staff, and to make improvements to the farm. Many family-scale organic farmers have the best intentions, but under the day-to-day pressures of farming, don't take the time to learn all the relevant laws and regulations and to document their well-intentioned practices. So that's what we're going to look at in this workshop. And the project that Robert Haddad and I are working on that is available to all of you to participate in for free. If you fill out our self-assignment, and Bethany, if you would put the link to the SurveyMonkey in the chat, if you fill out that self-assessment, we will respond with resources. And if you send us whatever you have that's written, your employee handbook or guidebook or your safety plan, or just a little bit you may have that's written, we will write an individual report for your farm and provide resources that may help you improve and get to be the kind of employer that we see Jodi able to be. So let's start out with the meaning of fairness. I want you to answer that question. What do you think fairness means on a farm? Turn your mic on and answer if you'd like to answer that question. Come on, some of you have ideas. I know that for sure. Are you not able to unmute? If you can't unmute, write something in the chat. What do you think fairness means on a farm? And if you look at the principles of organic agriculture, it's having a way of life that makes it possible to do the farm work, to be paid adequately, to have wages that make your life possible. Well, in the United States, we can't talk about fairness in the food system without first talking about systemic racism. There's no way to understand the way farmland is distributed and held, the way farm work is done and who does it, the way farm workers are treated and paid, the federal laws governing farm workers without acknowledging the role of racism. Leah Penniman has written, "From the early colonization of the Americas, our food system has been based on exploited labor and stolen land. The long history of oppressive systems goes back to the genocide of Native Americans, to the enslavement of people, to the takeover of Mexican territory and murder of Mexicans by the Texas Rangers, on to black codes, convict leasing, and sharecropping. Without looking at that history, it's hard to understand why huge disparities in food access and land access exist now." So would anybody like to comment on how you see this reflected in land use today or might be playing out on your farm? Jodi, you could jump in too if you want to. Right in the chat. Can we set the screen up so that everybody can see one another? So that we can see everyone? Because I'm going to ask a series of questions about workers' rights. And I want to know if you are getting the answers right or not. Can we do that?
I think the best way would be if you stop sharing your screen, and if everyone is able to go up to the view button and do either standard or side-by-side gallery.
Okay, great. Jodi, you want to stop sharing for a moment and then we'll come back with the share again? Okay, good. So, gallery. Okay. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question, and if you agree, wave your hand or put up the little hand gesture thing, the raise hand. Or if you don't, just don't move. Okay. So here's the question. An employer who runs a delivery service fires a worker. The only reason the employer gives is that the worker wears purple too often. Does the employer have the right to do this? Raise your hand if you think he does. No hands up? I don't see any hands up. Okay, Donna. Why do you think this the employer has the right to do that?
Because New York State is an at-will employer.
Exactly. 49 of the 50 states are at-will employers, and employers have the right to fire people for no reason at all. So let me ask another question. A farmer asked one of the workers to switch to a different work site, which makes the commute to work much longer. The worker refuses. The employer fires her. Does the employer have the right to do that? Raise your hand if you think the employer has the right. Okay, I see some hands going up. All right. So now you understand about at will. That's how it works. The power is in the hands of the employer. There are legal limitations to at will. Age, you can't discriminate. You can't fire someone because they're ill, if they can prove that. But nevertheless, when an employee handbook has at will written in bold print on every other page, as lawyers will advise you to do, how do you think that makes an employee feel? Really disempowered. Okay, next question. A farmer who breaks one of the tines of a digging fork while digging a bed for vegetables at a farm. The employer deducts the value of a new fork from the worker's pay. Does the employer have the right to do that? Raise your hand if you think they do. Good, I don't see any hands going up. That's right. The employer has to pay for equipment. If the worker breaks it in the course of work, that's just the way it is. Okay, next question. A worker who quits before getting paid for the week cannot claim payment for the time already worked before quitting. Raise your hand if you think that's correct. Suzanne, you want to explain why you think that that's correct?
I thought that if there were a contract that said you need to finish the week or something along that lines.
Does anyone else want to try and answer that question? Those of you who didn't raise your hands.
I didn't raise my hand only because I want to get paid for that time. And I have no idea.
You have the right to be paid for any time you work. Whenever you're quit, you still should be paid for whatever work you put in. Okay, next question. An employer, an undocumented worker, can that undocumented worker claim unemployment insurance? Raise your hand if you think they can. Very good. They can't. Oh, okay, or you think that they can. But in fact, they can't. They're undocumented. They're not allowed to get unemployment insurance. Okay, a worker who does not work directly with chemicals or pesticides does not need to know what materials are in use in the farm. Raise your hand if you agree with that. Good, I don't see any hands going up. Absolutely, everybody needs to know what materials are being used and have full disclosure, especially if there are any poisonous materials, full content of the label. Okay, when a worker receives her paycheck, there's a new deduction from her pay. She goes to her supervisor and asks what the deduction is for. Does the worker have the right to ask? Raise your hand if you think she does. Okay, very good. The only deductions are allowed are the legal ones, and any additional deduction is one that the worker has to agree to and has to be for the benefit of the worker, like alimony. Okay, now here is the trickiest question of all. And at the end of this question, I'm going to ask Jody to go back to screen sharing. But let me ask the question and see what people say first, okay? Federal law and most state laws do not guarantee agricultural workers the right to time and a half for overtime. New York, California, and Washington have recently added this. But in New York, it's only after 60 hours. So a worker on a farm spends a week driving a truck, making deliveries, assisting in the farm office, and selling food at the farmer's market stand, and puts in 50 hours a week. Should that worker expect time and a half for the 10 hours over 40 hours worked? What do you think? Put your hand up if you think that worker should get time and a half. Okay, Laura, you want to explain?
Because if I, understand it properly, all of those things are not considered farm work. Farm work is like, the actual like growing and harvesting of produce, or if you're a vegetable farm, but or equivalent sorts of things in other kinds of farming situations. And none of those were, like farm work.
Do people agree with that? So do you want to comment on it? Sherry, you have years of experience with workers. David, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I think that's true. I always forget about that distinction, but I think what you said is right.
Jody, would you go back to the screen sharing and put up the next slide about overtime? It's actually really tricky, and it's different from one state to the next. So whatever state you're in, you need to be sure that you know what those state regulations are, and also whether they're enforced. The federal definition of farm work is, as Laura said, it's the planting, the digging, the harvesting, etc. But if a job like driving the truck is intimately connected with that farm, or say chopping down trees does not become working for a lumber company. It's still working for that farm and could be considered farm work. So whether a worker is entitled to time and a half depends both on the federal definition and state definitions. And in New York State, when it's enforced, farmers do have to pay overtime when workers are doing things like driving a truck or working at a farm stand, particularly if that farm stand carries anything from another farm. That seems to be the borderline. It makes it into a store, so it's no longer farm work. It's pretty tricky though.
Is that like, even if half an hour is worked, that applies to the full 50-hour week?
Okay, so.
Did you hear that question, Liz?
No, I didn't hear it. I couldn't hear it.
Oh, okay. Could you repeat the question, David?
Yeah, I was asking, is that like, if half an hour is spent in the farm store, does that mean that the full 50 hours applies and the person is entitled to 10 hours overtime?
As I said, that will depend on how it's administered in the state. I know some farms in New York State that like keep separate books for the actual farm work and the work like working at the farm stand, and then pay separately. And that seems to be allowed. But it really will be different from state to state. In California, they're really strict about it. And if there's any work that isn't farm work, the whole time is considered not farm work, and they have to pay time and a half for overtime. And as I said, it's really a matter of enforcement too. So going beyond what's legal, in the handouts, there is a handout on workers' legal rights and another one on farmers' responsibilities. So that will also be helpful to you. But going beyond legal, let's look at what the basic rights are. You should be paid. And what is legal? You should be free of discrimination. The workplace has to be safe. You should get workman's compensation. It's required in New York, although not in all states. And work free from sexual harassment. Next slide. Your workplace rights apply whether you're documented or undocumented. You have to be paid for all the time you work, including travel within the job. If you're going from one field to a distant field, that's still considered part of your work. You don't have to be paid for travel to work and from work, but travel at work must be paid. And only the legal deductions, the ones that are required by law and additional ones that you may request. And then, depending on your state, whether you get time and a half for overtime. Next slide, please. So every farm worker needs to get a written agreement listing what the deal is you have with them. And you need to keep good records so that you can provide an agreement that has the your name, the employee's name, their social security number, their address, their sex, their occupation, the time and day of work, the hours worked, the total hours worked during the week, the pay basis, the regular hours worked, whether you're paying time and a half, the total amount of overtime, any additions or deductions from the wages. All of that needs to be on a sheet that the worker receives, and that's under federal law. So that applies in every state. Next slide. And workers do have the right to concerted action. That means going to the employer and saying that they want to discuss an issue. They have the right to do that, whether they're unionized or not. Of course, you can ignore them and not give them that right. And then they could try to bring charges against you. And that's a very long process and hard to prove. So, but they have the right to do that. Next slide. And finally, when we turn the page to real fairness, every employee should have the right to freedom of association. And that doesn't mean that you have to recognize a farm worker union, but it means that your workers can come to you as an individual or in twos or as a group and talk to you about their issues at the farm. That's a basic right that is recognized all over the world and by the International Labor Organization. Of course, it's one of the protocols that the United States government does not recognize for ILO. Okay, next slide. Basic to fairness on a farm is that your farm be safe. So in the toolkit for the Agricultural Justice Project, we have a checklist, a guide to creating a safety plan for your farm and a training for your workers in how to live up to that plan. And I got a lot of the ideas for this from Jody's farm. They have a great safety plan. Pie Ranch has a really extensive plan, which it turned out they had to use when there were fires this past year. But I was surprised when I first saw their safety plan. It included tsunamis because they're right on the shore of the Pacific Ocean. But anyway, next slide. We have materials that you can walk around your farm with this checklist and figure out what your safety plan should include, and then write it up and then train all of your workers. And best of all is if you ask them to help you with it. Because if everybody's looking out for the problems that might be causing unsafe places, a mat that you could slip on or whatever it is, your farm will become safer and safer as a place to work. Also included in safety should be ergonomics and good design. As physical workers, we need to know how to keep our bodies in good condition. And when I do this workshop as a full day thing, we spend some time learning good exercises that you can do together with your workers. Out at Jim Cochran's Swanton Berry Farm, they do stretches every morning before they pick strawberries. So there are ways of helping yourself and your workers keep your bodies in better shape. So what does equity look like? Next slide. I'm sure you've seen this meme before. Equality is everybody has the same size stand to stand on. But equity is when you have what you need for your particular situation. So the little guy has the highest stool to stand on, so everybody can see over it. Another part of safety on a farm is mental safety. Our mental health is a really essential part of having a good life on a farm. So mental health includes respectful treatment and clear expectations. As Jodi described on her farm, they have written expectations for what people do and expect from Roxbury Farm. And they've put a lot of it in Spanish because they have workers who are Spanish speaking, and even presented some of this orally for people who don't read well. So making sure that this is communicated. So if you do not have a written employee handbook and you would like one, please put your email in the chat and I will send you a model employee handbook that you can use and adapt for your farm. It's a handbook that's based on the standards of the Agricultural Justice Project. Of course, sexual harassment is a really important part of feeling safe on the farm. Severe instances of sexual abuse are cause for immediate firing, and there are a number of things like that. You can outlaw all violence, anyone bringing a weapon to your farm, alcohol, drugs, any of those things could lead to immediate firing. But for other things, it's really important to have a disciplinary process where there are warnings. And the next slide is the reference to the New York Center for Agricultural Health and Medicine. And they have the most exhaustive listing of things that are could possibly cause safety problems on a chat, on a farm. Things that you would never think of. And they have those resources in English and Spanish. And in New York State, they will come to your farm and do an assessment of what the safety problems are and give you a training for free. So this is a resource that we should really take advantage of. Okay, minimum wage has gone up quite a bit. Nevertheless, minimum wages are not the same thing as living wages. And at some localities, the people have calculated what a living wage is. The workers center down in Ithaca, The city of Rochester has a living wage that they post. And the Agricultural Justice Project has a living wage calculator if you would like to use one for your farm. Fairness really demands more than a minimum wage. And piecework is not a fair way to pay people. Piecework works well for the young and the fit. They can work really fast and really hard and pick a lot of whatever it is per hour, or get a lot done in that hour and get a high rate of pay. But as people get older, they can no longer do that. And the piecework also pushes people to push their own bodies beyond what is healthy for them. So a fair way of doing that is to pay an hourly wage and then perhaps some bonus for extra achievement. But just a straight piecework wage is not a fair way of paying people. And maybe we can get back to discussing some of these things when I'm done here. So for a farm to be a fair place, you really need to do good evaluations regularly. Check in on how things are going, express your appreciation. And as Jody said, finding out what are the particular interests of that worker. So by showing that you care about them as a human being and want them to achieve their goals for themselves, as well as the goals that you need for your farm business, you'll both win their loyalty, make them feel better, and also probably help them learn things that will help you on your farm and maybe keep them as an employee longer. And the very best kind of evaluations are two-way, where you take the time to ask them how you've been as a manager. This may be painful, but you may learn things that will help you improve and become a stronger manager over time. It is not a gotcha session. It really needs to be a good exchange between you and your employees. The last thing that every farm, every business, really every relationship needs is a good process for conflict resolution. People who work with you should agree to study your conflict resolution process. You should discuss it together and then make sure that everybody feels free to use it without fear of retaliation. Conflicts are going to happen. They're sure to happen. And the next slide is a suggestion of a possible conflict resolution process that you could use that starts by the two people who are in conflict discussing it, and if they can't resolve it, then having the supervisor or the farmer talk it over with them. And if you can't resolve it there might be, if it's a nonprofit farm, there might be someone from the board who would work with you on it. And if you can't do it there, then you could go to a real mediation from the Center for Dispute Settlement. And in New York State, agricultural mediations are free. So you can have a trained mediator come in and work out that conflict together with you and not pay anything to have it done, and come to an agreement that then you will check in and see if you are both observing and making it happen together. So let's open it up for questions that people have. Let's see.
Great, thanks, Liz. There was one question in the chat box. I think Laura answered it pretty well, but I'll share it with you too, so you can answer it out loud. At what point in terms of hours is overtime pay required in New York?
At this point, it's 60. And there's a wage board that's having hearings right now. I think there's one more hearing if you want to speak at it, where they are finding out from farmers and farm workers whether they should reduce the hours and bring it eventually back to 40 hours like other workers. And in my opinion, this is something that should be done on the federal level for all the states, because it makes it very hard for employers in New York when in our neighboring states, there is no requirement for time and a half for overtime. And yet farm work is really hard work. So why shouldn't farm workers like McDonald's workers get time and a half for overtime? They certainly should. Would anyone else like to comment on that?
All I was going to say is just that I believe the last wage board hearing was last night. I testified at the first wage board hearing, and I believe the second and third one were Wednesday and Friday, or Tuesday and Thursday, something like that. So I think the last one already occurred, unless they added more since then, and I just was not paying attention.
No, I think you're right. I'm confused on the dates, but it's still possible to send in written comments.
Yeah, I'm looking at the website right now, and it looks like there's another hearing scheduled for Friday, the 28th. So I'll put the link in the chat to that page.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. There's a couple of people I thought of, recently who I'm like, they might be good people to testify, but I'm like, oh, well, it's too late. So it's good to know there's another one. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, it's unclear if you can register to testify at this point, because all that's posted is a link to the Zoom. But yeah, so I'm not sure how that's working.
Yeah, when I registered, you were able to sign up as well. Anyway, farms that pay as much attention to treating employees with respect and providing the best working conditions and benefits that they can afford are rewarded by higher worker retention and higher quality work. You'll get the reputation for being a good employer. Your farm benefits by treating your workers fairly, by having a better run farm. Everybody knows the rules, understands who gets bonuses, why they're getting them, how to advance if there are places to advance to, how to get additional skills. Regular check-ins can be reassuring and help everybody learn more and grow their skills. And those evaluations also can prevent blow-ups. Just by having evaluations, you may head off issues that are building inside people and that will explode if you don't address them. So problem solving can take place before things come to a crisis. And so far as I can tell, there aren't very many places in the marketplace that are going to reward you, that will pay you more for having good labor policies. If anybody hears of a buyer who will do that, please let me know. In the Agricultural Justice Project, we have actually spoken with most of the most famous high quality organic brands to see if they would go for that. And often the founders will say, that's a wonderful idea. And then the marketing people come in and say, wait a minute, that isn't happening in the marketplace. But Pie Ranch, which is a mainly direct sales farm, has a farm stand. And at their farm stand, they have a sign that says, that welcomes their customers to pay a voluntary social justice tax to help the farm cover the costs of food justice certification and slightly higher wages for their workers. And almost all of their customers pay that tax. So it has been helping that farm pay for their certification. So there are things like that that you could try if you're selling direct. If you have a CSA, you could appeal to your members and say, I would like to be food justice certified. And this will help me make sure that I have really good labor policies. It'll get me more advice and more technical assistance. Could you make an extra payment to help me cover the cost? But the Agricultural Justice Project also does funding to cover those costs. So if you're a small scale farm and you apply, and especially for BIPOC farms, we have funding from the National Cooperative Grocers to cover the costs of food justice certification. But even if you don't do the certification, if you fill out the assessment that the link is in the chat to that Survey Monkey, we will respond with policies that you can use and advice and practices. So are there other questions that people have? Yeah, and Bethany, if you would put the link to the video that we have where Leah Peterman and Nancy Vale and Steve Manon talk about why it's important to take care of social justice as well as taking care of your earthworms. Any questions?
Liz, does the Agricultural Justice Project certify grocery stores or co-ops too?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the standards cover any kind of food or farm business.
Okay.
So far, we've only had one grocery store, which was Green Star.
Okay, yeah, that's why I asked, because I thought I had seen the logo somewhere when I was in Green Star, but
They have not renewed their certification
okay.
because they are going through some kind of turmoil there again. And I don't know what it is that's happening. It's COVID and the move and Brandon Kane leaving. They have dropped the certification. Or they haven't renewed it yet. Anyway. There's a question about designated day.
Any other questions for Liz or Jody?
And if you would like a model employee handbook, please do put your email in the chat and we'll send that to you.
Hi, Liz. Jim and I are sitting listening to this together, and Jim's question is, what can be done to make this more of an issue for the consumer to get passionate about?
And I think that's a really good question. And I think it's one thing, it's something that the NOFAs can do more outreach about. Food Justice Now, the Agricultural Justice Project, has someone who's doing more outreach. We've created a whole series of social media materials under Whose Voice is Missing. But getting that kind of understanding to employees is difficult because, you know, the buy local, buy from us campaigns that we've had over the past 50 years really have presented things as these are beautiful farms and it's wonderful. And this is a really pretty picture. And it seems like that's what people have wanted and needed to be attracted to local. And we haven't told the full story of what a struggle it is to cover the costs of paying ourselves and the people who work for us decently. So what are your thoughts? Sherry, do you have any suggestions?
Oh, gosh.
Well, I think that the social justice tax is a really good idea in a CSA setting. I wish we had thought of that previously.
Yeah, and I guess you know, when we sent the email out telling our CSA members that we couldn't afford to do CSA anymore, you know, from the feedback that we got, I realized just very simple concepts. Like in our newsletter, we were talking about our profitability decreasing for the past 5 years. And even a good friend of mine, I told her recently that Jim made more money his first year farming when he made $4,500 than we did this year. And she was shocked. Some people don't realize when you say my farm is not profitable, that it means that you're not making a profit. If you're not making a profit, that has a lot of impacts all throughout the line in terms of what you can offer your employees. Now, we have every employee on our farm. When you're not making a profit, every employee, including the 14-year-old that I hired this year because I couldn't get any college students to be a farm stand attendant, the 14-year-old made more money from farming than we did. And I guess I made a lot of assumptions that people understood how I was communicating with them, but I guess I needed to be more blunt. And so now we're getting emails from people saying, for people who did understand what we were saying I would have been willing to pay more. And our problem, and we talked a little bit about this in the lunch breakout, is that we tried really hard. It was a mission of ours to bring affordable, certified organic to the Trenton, Princeton area. But we didn't, when the cost of production were starting to really go up the past 6 years, we didn't pass those costs on to customers who now we realize were by and large able to afford to have those costs passed on to them. And like Jim said, if we did something like a tax, or if we did something like a sliding scale, that could have helped us.
Yeah, I think so.
So, you know, in all honesty, Liz, one of the things we stopped doing in the past 6 years to save money is we stopped going to conferences. and now we realize really that was not the way to save money.
Well, something that my farm did was we had a core group for the CSA, a group of the members who were like our board of directors and to whom we could take problems. And we shared with them and then with all of the members our farm budget so that they knew what we were making. And when the members saw that, the core group discussed it, and it was really quite amazing to hear them talking about how little we made and how amazed they were at how little it was and how they needed to pay us more. And they actually voted to pay $1 more per share per week so that we could get health insurance and a small retirement fund. I hear you couldn't hear that. Can you hear it better now, David? Is this better? We had the core sharing the information, sharing your farm budget is kind of a violation of the secretiveness that people have in this country about their money, but it can make a really big difference for the members of your CSA or your direct customers. Temple Wilson Farm has done that all along. The way their CSA works is the farm presents the budget to the members. Everybody actually is considered a farmer. They're the active farmers, the ones that are paid to do the farm work, and the inactive farmers who just get the food. And the members get together and they bid what they can pay. And if those bids add up to the budget, that's it. So people pay really different amounts of money and get different amounts of food too, because they can take more if they have a bigger family. Well, that's really the most radical farm that I know about. But at least sharing your budget with your members can help them understand what our situation is. And many of them who are making much more than we are will do something about it. So if you charge on a sliding scale, that can accommodate the people who have plenty of money and for whom an extra $10 or $15 a week is not a big deal. And then the people for whom that would be a struggle can pay less. So that money to subsidize people's shares doesn't come out of your rather threadbare purse. So I'm amazed that you have that experience at Honeybrook Farm, because I've always imagined it as a CSA that was doing tremendously well.
We were.
Well, yeah, I guess we were, and we were, I will tell you, the problem in Central Jersey for many of us that were able to make a living with just farm income. So Jim and I, when Jim started farming, you know, in 1990 or so, it was as a broke young man. So he didn't have any access to capital. He was incubated by a nonprofit early on. So a couple of things happened, and some other farmers on this call may be experiencing something like this or know of this happening. Our landlord was very accommodating with Jim at the beginning. The landlord had tried, it was a nonprofit environmental group. They had tried farming on their own as a program of the association, and they were no longer able to get grant money to float it. So they offered the lease opportunity to Jim and a partner. And so they didn't charge Jim any rent. They gave him free housing. They gave him free use of equipment. And most importantly, they gave him their membership list to start his CSA with. So they were wonderful in helping him start the business. And for probably the first decade, were more passively supportive as he built up a business, built up his membership, increased the amount of acreage he was converting to organic production, because this association still had a conventional soybean grower on their farm. Little by little, Jim grew in to converting that land. And then there came the years when the CSA was so popular that we had people parking on the street during strawberry season, and the board of the association changed, and it was time for them to reap the harvest of the farm. And we found ourselves for many years in a position where we were paying greater than fair market value in New Jersey. We think we were paying the highest agricultural rent in the state. And that was sort of the beginning of the end. So, and it also affected our relationship with that landlord, and it also affected our CSA members' relationship with the with the landlord. And so then you find yourself in this spiral, and now more and more of us that are tenant farmers have non-disparagement clauses. We have non-compete clauses. And what I would say is, you know, a lot of nonprofits boards have changed. When we first started farming at this farm, it was ladies from the garden club and an extension agent and a bunch of local environmentalists. And now increasingly it is made up, and many nonprofit boards are made up of corporate interests. And so it affected our ultimately our ag viability. So that was one issue. And then we also had non-farmers buying up preserved lands, starting farms, and approaching the workers of farmers who are bona fide farmers, farmers who work for a living, and enticing the experienced farm workers off of those farms. And then it was the typical, capitalist dilemma of then farmers who don't have that income from being lawyers or corporate employees, having to compete with them for the cost of labor, which drives up wages, and then made very heavily contributed to our farm no longer being profitable. So I know that's a lot, and I know that's not going to be representative of everybody's situation, but some of these issues are issues other farmers are facing.
Thank you for sharing that story. I call everybody's attention to the little video that we made about the importance of social justice, but also to the Disparity to Parity project and the series of webinars that we have been making, because in order to make a farm like yours pay you what you deserve, and for all of us to make a decent living at it, and for us to really, in good conscience, urge new people to become farmers, because it's a possible thing to do. We need to get away from the cheap food policy that we have in this country and return to parity with supply management. But we need to reinvent it. We need to design it so that it's not racist, so that fruit and vegetables are included as well as grains. But that's what we need for the 2023 Farm Bill. We need to have prices that are supported by the government, that buyers have to pay prices that cover the full costs of production. That's what parity is about, that the farm prices are in line with the rest of the economy. And if the farms, the bigger farms, the grain farms, etc., are getting those prices, that will raise the price that direct sales farms can charge as well. Because we're constrained by the much cheaper food from bigger, more industrial farms, and by the cheaper food from imports. Fair Trade USA is paying fair prices to farms that they buy from in Latin America, but then selling things at prices that undermine our prices as farmers in the United States. So we need a fair trade that is truly fair to all of us, to the farmers, to the people who work on our farms, and also to the people who need to buy the food. There's plenty of money in food. You see how much money is being raked in by the owners of the big corporations. They are making unheard of profits. The level of inequality has grown tremendously. Claire, did you want to say something? Do you want to comment about that?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that I had myself unmuted. No, I think you've done a great job already, Liz.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm just glad to be here. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. So I guess I would like you to put in the chat if there's anything that I mentioned that was really new to you that you learned from, either what I said about having a conflict resolution process or safety training, what wasn't very useful, what I should improve on, and overall whether you learned anything from this workshop. Because I've been building together with other people in the Agricultural Justice Project, we're trying to create a curricular module that can be used by every farmer training program in the country, whether they're training. You learn the meaning of at will. That's an important thing to know, especially if you're working. If you're an employee, you need to understand it. But if you want to be a fair employer, you have to have an understanding of that too, and make the commitment not to use it just because you can, but to have a process by which you evaluate people's work and only pay them for just cause. Customer tax for social benefits was new. Okay. Well, anyway, we're working on this curricular module, and we would like everyone who trains new farmers to use this material and not just train them how to be legal, but how to be fair. So anyone who is part of a training program or has good contacts with the training program, please let me know. I've had very favorable responses from Farm Credit East, from the University of Vermont, from the Moses training. I think there's a good chance that we can get things like conflict resolution and good evaluations, firing only for just cause, into farmer training programs all over the country.
Thank you very much, Liz and Jody. I also put a link to an evaluation for this session in the chat. So if you have a minute to fill that out, that'll help us with planning for next year.
Yeah, thanks so much, Katie. Jody, do you have any last words you want to say?
Just again, thank you, Liz, for inviting me to be part of this. Yeah, it was a great couple of hours, and thank you for everyone for joining us.
Well, I have to tell people that I've learned as much from Jody as she says she's learned from me. So thank you, and thank everybody. Thank you, NOFA, for having us. And have a good season, everyone. Get through the winter, and may COVID finally come to an end. I think we'll have to have booster shots for the rest of our lives, though.
Thank you.
Stay healthy, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, you too.